Hello, and welcome back to The Canadians. I'm your host, Jared Michael. Here at The Canadians, we attempt to understand Canada's contrarians. We believe contrarians are sometimes the only people holding valuable information the rest of society desperately needs. Today's guest is Selina Robinson. Selina is a former BC cabinet minister, former finance minister during the COVID-19 pandemic, and the author of Truth Be Told. Over her time in provincial politics, she held some of the most senior positions in government before a controversy surrounding comments she made about the history of Israel brought her political career to an abrupt end. That controversy forms part of our conversation, but what interested me most were the larger questions it opened up. What is it like to be Jewish in Canada today? In recent years, concerns about Jew hatred have moved from the margins of public conversation to the center of it. Following the attacks of October 7th, many Jewish Canadians reported feeling less safe, less understood, and increasingly uncertain about their place within institutions and communities they had long considered home. In this conversation, Selina and I discussed the rise of antisemitism in Canada, the lived experience of being Jewish in a country where Jews make up a very small minority of the population, the relationship between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, and the challenge of protecting minority communities in a democratic society. We also explore broader questions about equality, equity, identity, belonging, and the changing moral language of Canadian public life. Here's my conversation with Selina Robinson. Selina Robinson, welcome to The Canadians.
Thanks for having me, Derek.
Yeah, well, I picked up your book, Truth Be Told, shortly, right after it came out and was published. Made a pretty big impact on me when I read it. I think I reached out to you and we had a brief exchange over email back then. And and so I thought, you've kind of written a beautiful template for our conversation here. So I thought we could just kind of stick to the themes of your book there. And I don't know how much you want to talk about, the way you left the NDP, the incident that occurred to you. You could, might help to have a bit of context there for the conversation. But I did respect the fact in the book how you very openly were saying that, you didn't want to make the book about you and what happened to you and, and take on this kind of victim mentality about it. But you thought it was important to kind of highlight the values that you saw that were kind of being threatened, or, these shared values that aren't seeming to work anymore to help unify and protect us and protect minority groups. And so there seems to be a lot of things that came out of your story and incident that are concerning to all Canadians. And so, but maybe, just to get us started here, in any way you want to, however long or capsulize, you were a rising star in the NDP until you became like a shining star in the NDP. You're a cabinet minister for those first 2 years of the COVID pandemic, just like very high level of government, and it came crashing down fairly quickly. And so, in your own words, if you just kind of want to speak to, what happened there.
Sure. And so again, thanks for highlighting this story. And I think this story is an example of what's happening. So that's why I say I don't want it to be about me, but it's an example. We're seeing this everywhere now, in certainly Western culture. So I was and still am and share the values of New Democrats. I'm no longer a New Democrat, partly because of how I was treated, and I don't think they're being true to their values overall. So I've left the party, but my progressive values haven't changed. And I was a well-respected minister of the Crown. Under John Horgan's government, I served as the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and then Minister of Finance through a couple of the COVID years. And then when David Eby became Premier, he asked me to be the Minister for Post-Secondary Education and Future Skills. Well respected. I had a strong voice around the cabinet table. Well respected among my colleague peers, among New Democrats, but also well respected by BC Liberals. Everyone in the House, all at the time was 87 of us. I got along really well with everybody. Yes, we had battle to do, but there was certainly a lot of mutual respect for the work that we had in front of us. And of course, October 7th happened. I was the well-respected Jew in the crew. I've never hidden the fact that I'm Jewish. I've been a very proud Jew my entire life. I was tasked by the party, by New Democrats, to reach out to the Jewish community and recognize that Jewish values and New Democrat values are similar values, and help bring more people into the fold, which is what all political parties do is you outreach to various ethnic groups, minority groups, helping them to see how their values could be represented in government. And that was all fine and good until October 7th. And I found that I had colleagues who within 48 hours after October 7th, were launching appeals to the premier that we should be acknowledging the pain and suffering of the people of Gaza. Now, Israel hadn't done anything. They were still making sure that there were no Hamas terrorists within its borders. I was stunned. I appealed to the premier, I can't deal with this. I've got a community here in Vancouver that is reeling. Ben Mizrahi, of blessed memory, was killed at Nova Festival. He's from Vancouver, trying to support the community as best I could. And everyone, of course, was on heightened alert. Jewish communities around the world were on heightened alert. And of course, we were traumatized because we were seeing in real time what terrorists were doing to young people at the Nova Festival. We saw what they were doing to people who lived on kibbutz. We witnessed it in real time. And so people were being traumatized by what they were seeing. And the premier assured me that he would take care of it and deal with some of my colleagues who decided that somehow Jewish pain could be wished away because, of a history that the Palestinians in Gaza had been experiencing for the last number of years. So as a result, I was already a bit on guard around some of these colleagues, in particular around, they weren't close colleagues, but I really had some concerns about it. But I went into hyperdrive to make sure that my community had what it's needed in terms of safety. I was supported by the premier in everything that I did, but was certainly seeing other signs among New Democrats as the weeks and months progressed. The party itself, at a convention, was putting forward all of these international resolutions about how the party should take a position on an international conflict, which from my perspective was completely irresponsible of the party because we don't do international relations as a subnational party, right? We do provincial work. And so I was, doing my best. I call it walking a tightrope to try to make sure that our government did find itself jumping into something it has no expertise in, and frankly, pissing off the entire Jewish community and others by taking a position on something we know nothing about. And then, of course, in January, I was on a panel. This is the famous panel, B'nai B'rith panel that I was on. And the topic was the rise in anti-Semitism, particularly on campuses. I was a minister for post-secondary education. I had an important role given the Jew hatred we were seeing on campuses. And the famous line of when I was trying to explain why we were seeing such a rise is, these are young people. They don't understand the history. They don't understand that this, that this is a conflict over a crappy piece of land that had nothing on it. Yes, there were 350,000 people who lived there, but it didn't have much by way of infrastructure or resources. That was my whole thing. Mm-hmm. And it just so happens that somebody who hadn't been screened out, who does not like Jews, it's Sean Orr. He's now a city councillor in the city of Vancouver. He has a long history of making anti-Semitic comments. He clipped me, and all he clipped was crappy piece of land. So a minister of the Crown is calling pre-Israel, pre-1948 Israel, crappy piece of land. And then I was accused of Islamophobia because I described the land as not having any inherent value, meaning resources or infrastructure that would make it worthy of fighting over. Really trying to imply that this isn't about the land in many ways.
Right. Yeah.
So I was asked by the premier to apologize because I hurt people deeply. That was what he said, that you hurt people deeply. It's like, who did I hurt? Because they started coming after me, right? I was called every name in the book. Social media exploded. They started protesting me. And by they, I mean the pro-Palis who are wearing the keffiyehs and the masks and are marching in our streets and intimidating everybody. And then imams got involved, 6 imams in Lower Mainland and I think Vancouver Island. said to the premier that, what you did was so egregious, you won't be able to campaign in our mosques. And there are some significant mosques in Surrey and in, I think in Victoria as well. So the premier asked me to apologize. And I said, listen, if I hurt people, if my words hurt people, then I am sorry, because I did not mean to insult anybody. I don't understand how describing the land as not having inherent value in and of itself hurt people. But if I did, I want to learn. I want to understand. So I apologized. And then I was told I needed to make a bunch of phone calls to some Muslim leaders in the community. And not a single one can really explain to me how my words hurt them.
It's
How
quite
did
a
you hear
common
that?
description, isn't it? Over since Israel's formed, it's not your own unique way of describing that
N-
land. It's been around since the origin of the idea, just describing the idea that they weren't given agricultural land, weren't given factories. It was like almost like the Canadian prairies once the buffalo went. You had to like work hard to make this livable.
Most of the land was either desert or swamp.
Yeah,
So the value wasn't in the land. And that's what I was trying to explain.
yeah.
If I had said, listen, the value wasn't, there are other ways to say it. The value wasn't in the land. What I gave was a clippable moment that allowed Jew haters to run with, here's a Jew with power. She needs to not have any power. And so I was a target of anti-Semitism and Jew hatred. And the premier, initially, when I said to the premier, I sent him a note because things blew up. And I sent him a note, said, I am so sorry, crafting an apology. And his text back to me, which I still have, was, don't worry, happens to the best of us. So I didn't worry. I read that as, you have my back. And 72 hours later, I was fired.
Oh, yeah.
So that's what happened. And I decided that I'm still an MLA. I'm still a government MLA. I mean, I was heartbroken. I was devastated. I was humiliated. I was angry, all of those things. And even after I was fired, I got death threats. My office got vandalized, the outside of my office, with ugly words, ugly, ugly words. Had the police involved. We had the American police involved because some of the threats came from the States. So Homeland Security got involved, FBI got involved. It was a big deal. It was a really big deal. Took off with my family for 10 days or a week, just saying, I got to get out of here. And while I was away, I thought, I also want to make it right. So what do people need right now? Well, what people need is to talk to each other. And so from Mexico, I called the premier and said, listen, I think one way forward is to bring the Jewish community and the Arab Muslim community in British Columbia, bring the leadership together to start having conversations. To me, that's the work. Like, that is the work. I reached out to Deborah Lyons, who at the time was working for the federal government as the liaison for anti-Semitism. She had a role to play, the special envoy for anti-Semitism. Ran my idea by her. She said, Selina, whatever you need, I will help you. I thought, okay, great. Can you speak to your counterpart on Islamophobia and bring her on side? Let's get to work. And so I asked the premier for a little bit of resource to do what I think is really important to build trust and to build relationship, to build community. And that kept me going for about a month because he said, well, flesh it out, tell us what you need, what it would look like. And so I worked on that little project. And I was told that it's too political. And then I knew that these were not the New Democrats I signed on with.
Right.
And so I left the party. And I sat as an independent for the rest of my time. I mean, there were lots of other things that happened in there too, but people have to buy the book on Amazon called Truth Be Told to get the other details. But really, at the end of the day, I thought, you are not the people I thought you were.
Were you completely blindsided? Like before October
Yeah.
7th, were there any indications that there were problems afoot?
Like, there's history, so Mabel Elmore, who's an MLA, has an old history of saying, we need to get I'm trying to remember the quote. I want to try to get it right. We need to get the Zionists out of our union, something to that effect.
Right. Yeah.
We're talking about like 2007, 8, 9, somewhere in there. Jennifer Whiteside had talked about Israel as pinkwashing, which is this idea that they really don't, they use the fact that it's a gay-friendly place to wash over all the other terrible things that Israel as this holy, evil nation does. Like, so I knew I had colleagues who had said things historically that are anti-Semitic in nature, or anti-Zionist, which is just the modern form of anti-Semitism. And, but we didn't talk about that. That wasn't our job, right? And so it didn't manifest in any real way until after October 7th.
Yeah, you were proudly running around calling yourself the Jew in the crew. That
I
almost
was the Jew in the
feels
crew.
like no one would be saying that right now. It feels like
Right?
it's almost putting a target on your back.
I was the one who, I would work through Jewish holidays, right? So I'm a somewhat practicing Jew. I mean, you ask 10 Jews how they practice Judaism, and you get 10 different answers, and
Right.
they're all equally valid, and respected as Jewish people. And so I would work through Jewish holidays that I normally wouldn't work through because I feel so committed to the job. So, if cabinet was meeting on Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year, I would bring apples and honey, which is a traditional food. You dip the apple in honey, you make a blessing. And I would bring enough for everybody around the cabinet table and say the blessing and talk about the holiday. And everyone loved it.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it was welcome. For Hanukkah, I would light the Hanukkah menorah. If we had a caucus meeting that night during the eight nights of the holiday, I would bring my menorah in and I'd light the candles and I would do a little teaching about what the holiday is. And people loved that I did that.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't love that I have this relationship with Israel. But all Jews have a relationship with Israel.
That seems to be what's really shifted. I grew up on the left, and now I go back, and I think I was quite biased actually against Israel growing up. Like, I don't have
Tell
any.
me about that. I don't understand that. Explain that to me.
Well, I don't have any Jewish heritage. I didn't really have any Jewish friends. I kind of jumped into left-wing politics, more, activist style left-wing politics, probably when I was about 16, 15,
Yep.
when I left my religion.
Perfect age.
Yeah, I kind of left my faith and jumped into, left-wing politics. And I kind of just, everything I learned about Israel was learned through that lens. Like if information was coming from somewhere else, I tended to vet it out, because I only trusted information that came through left-wing sources. And so I was unconsciously vetting without knowing. I was kind of vetting other perspectives out. I thought I was being responsible. I thought those were bad information. And so I tended to just, over 25 years, I just formed an image of Israel as being kind of a puppet state of the US or Western powers that just wanted influence in the Middle East. They want oil, they want access. And so they're propping up and creating Israel in order to have access to that. And so it's just kind of this Western arm, essentially. And they're using this old excuse of there being some Jewish heritage back in this region as, to prop up this whole imperial enterprise, essentially. But it's all, that's what it is mostly, is this kind of Western, and so it was when I started really, when I discovered I was in an echo chamber and I started really challenging a lot of the things I'd been raised on, that I started reading, like I went back and read about the formation of Israel, and it was completely changed my perspective, shockingly. I realized that even after thinking I was well informed for 25 years, I was well informed on one perspective. And it really did. And so I look back now at the whole way, a lot of the way I saw Israel and talked about is a bit problematic on the left now. But something seems to have changed more in that now, like it is that Joe Biden proudly, his whole career, proudly declared himself a Zionist. Like, this was not a problem on the left till yesterday, basically. It seems like, is that what you've identified as kind of one of the major things that's occurred here, is now just Israel existing in the first place, and just the idea of Zionism seems to be a line too far for a lot of people?
Yeah, it's become an identity, right? And so if you can be anti-Zionist, then you belong to a whole group, right? You belong to a whole movement, and it's a way to express yourself as these are my people, those are not my people. And I too have been doing a lot of reading around like, so how did we get here?
Yeah.
Because, like my father's generation, he grew up in Montreal and he had lots of stories of anti-Semitism, getting beat up on a Friday if he was walking to synagogue. If you looked Jewish, you got beat up. So you just learn to avoid which neighborhoods. And I had the privilege really of growing up in the late 60s, early 70s in Montreal. Never experienced any of that. And then when I moved to Vancouver, yeah, there was some. There was more here for sure than there was in Montreal, but it was really, it was frowned upon. Even though there were quotas at UBC for, till, I don't know, I want to say the 50s or 60s. And even though Gulf and country clubs wouldn't let Jews join until the late 70s, early 80s.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
Like that's how long it's been that Jews have been excluded. But in my life, as certainly as an adult, I'm 62, never experienced anti-Semitism, like just never. And so, I mean, yes, as a kid, there were the odd thing. And if it did appear, it was more around people not knowing. So I actually just had an episode. I was on vacation and this woman said, yeah, I bought this new purse and I Jewed the guy down.
Wow. I didn't know people still use that term. Yeah.
People still use that. So it's really old. This woman had no idea, I think. She had no idea that this was a Jewish star. So even that tells you that this was a simple woman. She thought it was a star from some sort of service group. Anyway, I said, no, it's a Jewish star. But she never made the connection between her comment and my Jewish star. Anyway, but again, there were those comments over the years, but usually it wasn't about trying to dehumanize me, delegitimize me, or deny me the right to be all that I am. It was usually because they'd heard it from someone else and they thought it was a cool thing to say or was a descriptive thing to say. And usually when I would explain to people that this is what you're saying, they go, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I will never do that again. That's usually how the anti-Semitism that I've experienced sort of played out. But it's different now. And I'll give you a perfect example. So I've been a politician, quite a successful politician for 16 years, well-liked in my community. And I do have to say that my community, after I was fired, the people of Coquitlam-Millardville wrapped their arms around me. The people that I represented were so angry with this premier. I mean, they still elected a new Democrat MLA in the next election, but they came up to me and in grocery lineups at the local coffee shop, when I go for a walk around the block, they would say how it was so inappropriate what happened to me, and they're so angry. So that provided me with tremendous comfort that the people that wanted me to represent them were insulted by our premier. But I was walking in the park and a woman who had worked actively on my campaign, had donated hundreds of dollars every year to my campaign, approached me and asked me how I was enjoying retirement. This is a retired school teacher. And I said, well, I'm finding things to do. It's an adjustment. And I've been volunteering on the anti-Semitism task force that the Jewish communities put together because there's been a tremendous rise in anti-Semitism. And she looked at me like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
I said, no, there's been a tremendous rise in anti-Semitism. People are shooting at Jewish schools. Our synagogue here was firebombed. Like I just gave her the list. There's swastikas now appearing on bus stops. It's like just around the corner from where we were. And she's like, oh, it's not that big a deal. I don't know why you're blowing it up into anything besides the people of Gaza. Mm-hmm. And I just said, oh, stop. Like, are you serious? Like, you think that because a foreign body is taking action, whether you agree with it or not, this isn't a judgment on Israel, that I get to be targeted And then I pointed out, because she's got dual citizenship, so I know she's American as well. I said, so are you happy with your president? No, I hate him. It's like, so should I target you? Should I blame you for the actions of Trump? Well, that's different. Don't go changing the subject.
Yeah.
And I just said, no, you don't get it. And this went on, and I was heartbroken. It's those interactions. It's like, you know me, and you don't care that I am telling you that there are people who are dehumanizing me, delegitimizing me, and threatening me and my family because of my identity. And you call yourself a progressive, and you're arguing with me about my own lived experience. You are not very progressive.
Yeah.
And you hate Jews.
Yeah. I grew up on the left with this idea that Jews were kind of the canary in the coal mine, that if you started seeing this rising anti-Semitism, that you need to start paying attention, because that was often an indicator that racial and ethnic tensions across the board are rising. And it seems that we've just completely thrown that lesson out the window as we watch it just rise to unprecedented levels before.
Yeah, that's frankly what worries me the most. And I do think, so I think there's a bunch of things going on at the same time. So there's evidence now that this has been in the planning for 20 years. This wasn't a spontaneous uprising that came out of Gaza.
Are you talking about the October 7th? Or are you
the
talking
October
about...
7th.
Oh, okay.
But the anti-Semitism that followed is part of the plan. So that's,
right, yeah.
I've been saying, when I give presentations, while Hamas was building tunnels in Gaza, they were building tunnels here too.
Yeah, intellectual tunnels.
Yeah, we just weren't paying attention.
Yeah. And
or
so
the people
you
who
said
should have been
that
paying attention.
you said that you've spent some time now, you're blindsided. So, now you've spent some time trying to make sense of some of that. Have you started to tease apart some of the ideas?
Yeah, some of it I have started to tease it apart. And so I do think there has been a master plan to do exactly what we're seeing. When you think about it, while Amazon might be efficient at getting you your stuff very quickly, there's no way they delivered all of those Palestinian flags on October 8th that we see right across the globe in all of these marches. There's no way that they were organized. And there's evidence now people are seeing where a lot of the activities that we saw in the days and weeks, and even the campus activities, they were all pre-organized. There were how-to pamphlets that were published well before October 7th. So that means that there was a whole plan. There was a plan of attack in Israel, and there was a plan of attack outside of Israel. And everyone says follow the money. So there's lots of evidence now that talks about NGOs, non-government organizations, and how they have been infiltrated over the last dozen or so years by Hamas operatives. There's evidence in our post-secondary institutions. There's evidence of Qatar money, because Qatar plays both sides. There's evidence of Iran, China, and Russia, and how they're using social media, the bots that we're seeing that drive the algorithms. There's evidence of Twitter handles, for example, or X handles as I call them now, that were dormant and somewhat lightly active, but then October 7th, October 8th, they lit up with activity. And so it starts to tell a story. And others have written books that Douglas Murray's written a book about sort of what happened that day. That came out, I want to say, a year and a half ago. And now Warren Kinsella just wrote a book, The Hidden Hand, which I highly recommend. It's an easy-ish read. So there's no trauma in the telling, whereas Douglas Murray's book tells what happened October 7th, October 8th. But Warren Kinsella goes out and does the research and starts piecing together the chunks of information that are coming out now that demonstrates how foreign nationals have been influencing this for a long time. And it really is about destroying the social fabric of Western culture. And and so at the end of the day, it's an attack on democracy. And that's really how I think we need to be thinking about this. This is an attack on democracy. If we don't trust our institutions, if we don't trust government, And Trump may have a role to play somewhere in this. I haven't seen it that much, but if you don't trust government, you don't trust media, AI, all that stuff, we don't know what to believe anymore, then you don't trust your neighbor either.
Yeah.
And democracy only works because we trust each other.
And so how do you see this war outside of Israel occurring in the West? Like, are you seeing, my take on this is I think that a lot of this has started with certain ideas and closing off of other ideas in universities. And that's how ultimately it reached our institutions and our other NGOs and our other levels of government. Is it felt like,
Yeah.
how do you see you talk about a strategy to undermine democracy in the West? How is that how is that implemented?
In terms of how are they doing the destruction?
Yeah, how have they undermined it? How have they, like I say, I see that kind of coming through universities largely, but also
Yeah.
through activism and activist groups, a multi-pronged
Yeah.
approach. But how are you
Well,
seeing it?
I think it's a combination of things. So I don't think there's any one thing. That I think it's been a
Yeah.
multi-pronged campaign that targets it. So some of it is about you're not allowed to have different ideas.
Hmm.
So some of it is the silencing. The right does it too. So it's not like that's owned by anybody else.
Hmm.
Like it's extremism that silences everybody else. So extremism, whether it comes from left or right, they're bad for democracy. It also comes from, I think, certainly social media and the algorithms, because it's the echo chamber that you described, right? So the echo chamber just feeds us what we think to be true and real. I also think this is it's our critical thinking skills. We've become so reliant on our information sources,
Yeah.
um, TikTok, Twitter, wherever you get your info,
Your
Facebook,
tribe, just outsource to your tribe.
to whatever that might look like. And so we don't talk to people who are different from us.
Hmm.
In the old days when we talked with our neighbors and the people at work, as long as your work wasn't all driven by a same cohort. So in politics, we all tend to think the same because, right, we that's what drives us. But I'm thinking if you work in a bank, you might not all think the same. If you work in
Hmm.
a grocery store, you might not all think the same. But if you're not talking with each other, you're not learning that there's different ways of thinking because everyone is doing this now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're not talking with each other, which means we're also not listening to each other. I think that's part of it. I also think the demise of traditional journalism. I think we are seeing the gutting of journalism, right? With this, if we really want to go back, was it Ted Turner that started the 24-hour news cycle,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And so the competition for getting the story out first really changed with the advent of citizen journalists. And citizen journalists don't have a code of ethics. They don't have to tell the truth. They just have to have an opinion and a following. And the pressure on real journalists, folks who've been trained, who have ethics, who are required to do their research and double check facts, they're under pressure to get stories out
Hmm.
fast. And so they're not double checking, or their editors aren't double checking. Like the speed is not allowing for real information real analysis to happen. But we're still operating as if that is happening.
Yeah.
And so we haven't adjusted to the new journalistic reality, which is garbage in, garbage out. And that's not a slag on the real journalists. I don't want to
Hmm.
insult them. There are pressures on them and their ability to do what they used to be able to do. They can't do it anymore.
Yeah, it's just the environment we're in now. It's just I find also with that speed you're talking about, it's just there's absolutely no reflection anymore. Once a story
Exactly.
happens, we never go back and look at anything again. It's just on
No.
to the next thing happening, and I think that's a problem too. That we need to be able to go back and re-look at things again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even what happened to me, um, it was hot news for 5 days.
Mhm.
Well, until I got fired, and then it was hot news for another 2 days. And no one ever went back to say to David Eby,
Yeah.
do you think that you made a mistake? Do you think that was
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah. Let's take a look at what happened there. Yeah.
Look, so, do you think that what you did actually made anti-Semitism worse? From my perspective, I think he gave permission to everybody else to hate on Jews.
Right. Yeah.
I think.
Well, there was a couple other directions I wanted to ask you about too. And
Yeah.
one of them is you mentioned already just the amount of mosques in like the lower mainland and whatnot. And I don't think a lot of people know, or some people don't know at least, the difference in demographics between the Jewish people and, let's say,
Yeah.
Christians and Muslims. It's like, I don't even think it's one factor. It's like two factors, isn't it? Like there's like,
Oh,
you measure like Christians and Muslims are somewhere like 1.5 to 2 billion, somewhere,
yeah,
where Jews, aren't they like 15, 16 million or something?
exactly. So
It's a very,
yeah. So our numbers are very small.
yeah, true
Here,
minority.
we're a super minority, not just a
Yeah.
minority, a super minority. A couple of things about that. So there in 1933, so before, just as a Holocaust, 1933, before the Holocaust, there were more Jews in the world than there are now.
Oh, wow. Yeah, okay.
I
Holy.
remember 6 million were killed.
Yeah.
6 million were killed. And we still have not made up our numbers.
Wow. Yeah.
So we were never a big population anyway, because we don't proselytize. It's not.
Yeah.
So I always laugh when they call us colonizers. It's like, we don't even proselytize. How
Yeah,
can we
yeah, yeah.
colonize?
Yeah.
I mean, you can join us, but we're not going to ask you to join us. But you're welcome to join us if you want to do the work. The other thing is, in Canada, there's only about 400,000, maybe, in all of Canada. In BC, we're about 42,000.
Yeah.
And in Canada, we tend to be mostly in the major cities: Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Winnipeg, Calgary.
Right.
That's order of size, right? A handful in Ottawa. So we're really a very small minority, and most Canadians will never meet a Jew. That's the other thing that it dawned on me.
Mm-hmm.
Most Canadians will never meet a Jewish that they know is Jewish.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
that's part of the role I took on in the book, was like, this is a way for you to meet a Jewish person,
Mm-hmm.
Who went down in infamy, but that you can understand, this is who we are. This is how we are in the world. This is what's important to us. But when you take a look at other groups, they far outweigh us. Now, that's not to say that there aren't other minority groups. There's, whether there was Yazidi or Baha'i, or there's other very
Jehovah's
small
Witnesses,
minority groups. We're not the only one. But given how small we are and the amount of attraction we get, comes across as an obsession.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wanted to ask you then about the demographics at play when you're talking about parties that rely on voters and voter bases, and
Oh, yeah.
and so and this is maybe one of those transcendental values we need to protect as a way in a democratic system where majority rules. How do we protect the minorities? And so do you see that at play at all? Like the large amount of Muslim voter base, but also I just wanted to also follow up with the idea that there seemed to be a difference between October 7th and 9/11. And it seems like after 9/11, the moderate Muslims were out in force, letting everybody know, we are moderate Muslims. We have nothing to do with those people. We do not want to be associated with them, and that just didn't seem to happen this time around at all.
Nope.
And so I wanted to ask you about that too, that double play, the fact that there doesn't seem to be moderate Muslim groups coming out in support of the Jewish community. And then and then does that affect the voter base and the appeal to, let's say an NDP trying to stay in power?
Yeah. Those are really good questions in terms of, what the implications might be. I too have been struck by the silence. I mean, there have been certainly Muslim voices. I don't want to say there haven't been any, but they're not very loud, and there's not a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know where they are. You'd have to get one of them on
Yeah,
your
yeah,
show
yeah.
and ask them about their voice. That's saddened me. And that was one of the things I was hoping to accomplish, would be to find the moderate Muslim voices,
Hmm.
to meet with the moderate Jewish voices, because we too have extremists. I don't want to pretend like we too have people who feel very strongly about a lot of different things. And to start the dialogue, to break bread, to have the conversations that we should be having around what is happening to the people of Gaza is terrible. And what is happening to the people in Israel is terrible. What are we going to do about it here? We don't live there. But how
Hmm.
are we going to make sure that what happens there doesn't destroy us here?
Hmm.
I think those are important conversations to have. Um, Unfortunately, the premier didn't want me to have those conversations. And I do think that, and this is just my assessment, I do think it's not worth the potential loss of voters. I
Yeah.
do think it was a political calculation. And that's why I needed to leave, because while I love the battle of politics and the politicking, I got into this business to make the world a better place.
Hmm.
And if it means not winning an election because I do the right thing, so be it. But I am not going to be silent because I'm afraid I might lose an election if I turn my back on doing the right thing. And unfortunately, I think the current leadership of the BC New Democrats it's politics 100% of the time, rather than doing what's right 100% of the time and trying
Yeah.
to make the good politics work.
Well, that's another wonder. I was wondering if there's been like a couple places, I kind of started going down this rabbit hole maybe a decade ago. I kind of realized I was in this really bad echo chamber and I needed to start reaching out and start getting new perspectives in. And, and I ended up falling back, and pushing back against a lot of current progressive ideas. And I say this as someone who was an activist most of my life. But I am a little uncomfortable. I talked to Andrew Weaver recently too, and he kind of points, he thinks there was a turn at the NDP when John Horgan left and David Eby came in. And, we talk about the Muslim, moderate, maybe chasing some votes there. And but there's also an activist base now that seems very disassociated with the traditional way the NDP used to operate. I find that they're kind of operating with this kind of, winner gets all kind of mentality, as opposed to compromise, and that John Horgan
Yeah.
kind of brought. And do you see that at play as well? That it's not
Yeah.
that there's an activist base also that is very influential.
Well, there's always been an activist base, so I don't want
Well,
anyone to think that it's new. There's always been an
yeah,
activist base,
maybe
and
the
I don't.
activism has shifted.
Well, they've been given more space.
Yeah.
So, and I don't come from an activist place. That's not my background. I
Right.
come at it, my line of work, I was a family therapist, and a more policy frame, right? I want good New Democrat value policies, but I'm not going to fight the man, blah, blah, blah. That's never been my jam.
Right.
Even though there's a place for it. I'm not saying that there isn't, but just wasn't my thing. Under John Horgan's leadership, John was a very different kind of leader. And he was the kind of leader that I could have worked for the rest of my life, and I always get choked up when I talk about him. Anyway, he was the kind of leader that if you went to him and you said, I'm having trouble with this, that, and the other, he might give you a few pointers, but he trusted you to go fix it. Whereas under David's leadership, he'll take it before he thinks that, because I don't think he trusts you to actually solve it. So he's pulled a lot more into the premier's office. After I was fired, John Horgan called me from Berlin, because he was Canada's ambassador to Germany. And he was spitting mad. He was furious. He could not believe that David did what he did. So I knew from John that if John had still been premier,
Mm-hmm.
it would have been a different result.
Yeah.
Now, some have speculated that the premier saw this as a way to get rid of me because we didn't have a great relationship. I learned, while I was writing the book, I learned that David Eby did not want me to be finance minister, and he started to organize my cabinet colleagues to approach the premier. And someone gave him advice, said, no, the premier gets to make the decisions who's in his cabinet and what roles. Don't you dare do this. But I didn't catch any wind of it. I had no idea. And then people asked me, well, why doesn't he like you? And it's like, I have no idea. You're going to have to ask him.
Yeah.
He's never told me he didn't like me. we've had conflict, but I've had conflict with lots of other colleagues. It's what you do around a cabinet table, right? You tussle, you fight for resources, you do it collegially. But I don't know, maybe he had it in for me. He didn't want me to be his finance minister. I don't know. I frankly do not know if this was personal. I do want to get back though, Jared, to the comment that you made around, was this about politics? Was this about preserving votes? And most of the mosques, or most of the Muslim electorate lives in Surrey. And so in my mind, and again, this is my mind, I don't know for sure, I can, and I did hear that, what I did hear, that a number of my colleagues were expressed concern to the Premier around their electoral survival, if I stay in cabinet. And I suspect they were Surrey colleagues. And what I find fascinating is that that's where they lost most of their seats.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Because they're a conservative population overall.
Yeah.
Right? They're not naturally New Democrats.
No, yeah.
Right? They're conservative by nature, I would suggest, in terms of what they're looking for around education, around tax dollars, all of those things. So I'm thinking, so you lost the Jewish vote, which I think by nature is New Democrat, although that's gone now.
That's shifting.
That is completely gone. Completely gone. But from a values perspective, I had no problem being a New Democrat.
Yeah.
Because it fits so well with my Jewish values, right? Which is, and the one that drives me is the obligation to tikkun olam, which means to heal the world, to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
It's a huge driving factor for me and in the Jewish community, our obligation to make the world better than when you got here. It's why I became a politician. It's why I became a family therapist. Like, these were the things that filled my heart and my soul. And I think that's what New Democrats used to want too, and maybe they still do. But to use anti-Zionism as a way to galvanize your base is pathetic. It's weak. It's actually, I think it's very weak.
The other ideas I'm wrestling with as someone who identified being on the left, and I kind of call myself a centrist these days, but I think temperamentally I grew up in Fort McMurray in conservative culture, and I rejected it right out the gate. I didn't reject my faith, but I'm just temperamentally a bit left leaning, just the way I move through life. It's just the way people are. I have nothing against conservatives, and we need conservatives, and so no hate there or anything. It's just temperamentally, I think I'm a bit of a left-leaning person. And so I do, I've identified. I have places. I wonder, some of the ideas. I'm struggling with the ideas, and I saw you kind of talking positively about it in your book still, and I've wondered if I've gone down this rabbit hole at all, and that's. I'm a little skeptical about the adoption of anti-racism, the way it's been brought in a modern, it gets replaced the colorblind society ideal. And the colorblind society ideal was, I grew up as a person of color. I don't look at it now, but my mom is Japanese. I had long hair and I grew up in Fort McMurray. So most people just assumed I was First Nations. And so I just got endless, I was just always called either the Indian boy or the Chinese kid growing up. And so I know what it's like to walk through life as a visible minority. My mom's a visible minority.
Yeah.
And I really liked the colorblind society ideal, to be judged by the content of your character, not the color of your skin. I didn't want to be, and I think that's a winning formula in a country like Canada that's brought together so many immigrants in so much short time span with such different backgrounds. I think it's one of the best, I think we didn't just randomly come up with that. I think it was a solution to a problem at the time. And I've been, in anti-racism, the type that's being advocated by Robin DiAngelo and White Fragility and Ibram X. Kendi and How to Be an Anti-Racist. I read both those books. They openly say in those books, there's no such thing as common humanity. That the difference between a black woman and a white man is greater than the common humanity they share. And I just...
You're calling bullshit, aren't you?
I don't see that. Sure, we can go with that. And a lot of countries in the world do go by that system. And there's a ranking of ethnic rankings from top to bottom. But I just see that as I've just watched over 10 years, racial and ethnic divisions get worse and worse and
Yeah.
worse. And I can't help but think it's partially due to the implementation of this new way of racial relations that I think equality works better. But
So I
yeah,
have a bunch of thoughts about that.
all right.
So I do want to remind you, in I think it was 2020, 2017. I'm trying to remember which election it was. I think it was 2017. John Horgan was asked a question, an anti-racism question, and he talked about that he doesn't see color.
Yeah.
Yes, he didn't see color because he was colorblind, but he also didn't see people as color.
Right.
He was raised with this ethic that you're describing.
Yeah.
We're of a similar era.
Yeah.
Where people were people, and it didn't matter what they looked like, what color they were, what their status was. If they drove a fancy car or a crappy car, you treated people with respect and dignity and all that kind of stuff.
Judge them by their character.
Right.
Yeah.
And when he said that, because it was a televised debate, I knew right away that people were going to be really upset. A lot of people were going to be really upset. And mostly because, and this is, I think, the caution, I don't want to throw the baby in the bathwater, is that in some cultures, in some groups, people were shamed because of their color. And so trying to reclaim that is really important, and to recognize it. So how do you create space for that recognition and value it and still not see color? So that becomes the tension. So I'm not picking one side or the other, but both systems are flawed. Both systems in terms of thinking about race. The other thing I want to say about that is that for me, who needs, I think about what government tools and assistance exist and who should get them. You could be an Indigenous person who grew up in a wealthy family and have access to a whole bunch of supports. You could be a white male who's grew up in a challenged environment, no money, and find yourself without any supports. And so where should government be putting its efforts? And for me, it's always come down to poverty. And that's the part that, as a lefty, it's like we are no longer talking about poverty. Poverty is the biggest challenge, not color of your skin. It's poverty, people. Poverty is the biggest destructive factor in our society. And so if we're not helping the white kid down the street whose family doesn't have enough food to feed him and his 3 siblings, we're going to feel the effects of that. If we continue to ignore that, to me, that's the bigger issue. And and the other thing I think is it's the all or nothing. So yes, sometimes growing up, particularly for visible minorities, I'm not a visible minority, which is why people lump us in with white. So yeah, my skin is white, but that is not my only identity. And that's, I think, part of the problem is we're putting people in a single box, but we're multi-boxed. We have multi-identities. So I had a great conversation with John Horgan years ago. I had the benefit of the equity mandate. So the equity mandate for BC New Democrats is if a man holds a seat, a white man holds a seat and no longer is running, then only a woman can run, or now a woman, a person of color, trying to get the right representation. Representation matters. I get it. And I remember people diminishing my electoral success in terms of getting the seat because I was a woman, not because I was the best candidate. And I was like, well, open it up to, I'll crush any man who who decides to run. But it comes with some downside too. And I'm not the only one. I know that there were other women who also felt that we weren't there legitimately because we were given priority over anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
So I do see both sides, because part of what was happening for New Democrats who said we want to get more women elected, they would run more women, but they were always in unelectable seats. So more women were getting elected because the safe seats were all occupied by men who kept running because they were safe seats.
Right, yeah.
So they had to do something. So again, it's one of those things where you can recognize that there's a systemic problem and you want to fix it. But if you overdo it, or if you do it to the exclusion of other things, then you actually create different problems. So like, I'm very worried right now. I really am very worried right now about what we're seeing with DRIPA, right? With the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. I think we're going to see a rise in anti-Indigenous racism because we're not getting it right. It's being challenged, right? The Cowichan decision. I don't know if you've followed this.
Yeah, I've been following all this,
Right?
Yeah.
So there's a Cowichan decision, and I can appreciate what we were trying to do with DRIPA, because I was part of that government that brought in DRIPA. It's not working the way we thought it would work. We need to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to fix it with First Nations people. Like, we need to get everyone on side to say, okay, because the risk of not getting it right is that you wind up with more racism. And it's the same thing with the anti-racism as you're describing it.
Right, yeah.
Right? It's the same problem. If you continue to drive a wedge about how they're different, or that you privilege certain groups, if you do it for too long or in too many ways, other groups don't feel like they have equal footing, and maybe those groups didn't have equal footing, and you're trying to elevate all boats, not just those boats, but all boats. We want everyone to have equal opportunity. So it's tricky to recognize the both and rather than the either or.
Yeah, I've been struggling with that a bit because I think I am a bit of an old school 90s progressive, and so I kind of do believe in equality. And not I've really looked into it too. I've done my homework. I've read books. I've been talking to people for a decade about this, and still not just I'm not convinced that the shift from equality to equity was a good move. I'm not convinced the shift from the colorblind society ideal to anti-racism was a good move. I feel like it is like you say, they're not perfect. None of these systems are perfect. But one of them promoted unity at the end of the day.
Yes.
It was always unity. And the other one's promoting division. And like you say, it's a matter of time even. And so I'm like an old school classist, like you're saying. Like, I feel the answer to this is to look at class. Who's suffering? Yes. Who's the bottom 10%? We don't care what color their skin are. We don't care what heritage they are. We are helping those people. And so that gets rid of all the problems now. We don't have to worry. We can just take care of the bottom, the people on the bottom.
And for me, I think that's, to me, is always the issue, is who's suffering, not who's suffering the most. There's no competition in suffering, but how do we help that group? So, I want people to be proud of their heritage. Mm-hmm. I don't care what your heritage is. Be proud of it. Or embarrassed by it. I think you can be embarrassed by it. But you can also be proud of it. Like, it's not like everything is all good or all bad.
Yeah.
Right? I think we can all dig up stuff. And there'll be good stuff and bad stuff. But pride in who you are as a human being. Are you making the world a better place? Are you contributing in a meaningful way? Do you need help sometimes? How do we decide who needs more help than others? Because really, in government, you do have to pick, because you can't always help all people all the time. So for me, it's about, I want to help the poorest of the poor. I want to help, how much of a hand up do you need in order to find your strength? Mm-hmm. So the other thing, and this is a whole other show, is about personal responsibility.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think we have fallen into a bit of a trap where everything is about context, or everything is about your childhood, or everything is about something else, rather, and sometimes it is. I don't want to say it's not, because we're all a product of our history, every single one of us. And what personal responsibility do we have to take for the choices we made, the decisions we made, the roads not taken, and what do we need to do to get back on track?
Yeah.
So instead of so much of a backward look at where we come from, we're not looking enough around where we are and where we want to go.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's also, and I come as a trained family therapist, and we spend a lot of time looking back at childhood and your inner child, and that was the thing, and how, your parents screwed you up, and because all parents screw up their kids. But that was sort of the rigueur of the day, like that was the frame. But that, as a therapist, I changed. Like I thought, this doesn't help people move forward. And so I moved to solution-focused therapy, which is really about, okay, so shit happened and it was hard. It's had impact. It's skewed your thinking. What do we need to do to get you moving forward?
Mm-hmm.
What would be helpful to start figuring out the new path? And I think in many ways, that's, I think, where we need to go.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So yeah, we come from, I don't know how many countries are represented in Canada in terms of where people come from.
Yeah.
We all come from someplace else typically, although lots of folks are born here now and can't trace back. So what do we need to do to get along? What do we need to do to make sure that those who are struggling the most, have a roof over their head and have food in their belly at a minimum,
Mm-hmm.
and clean water? Can I just complain about how the fact that it makes me crazy that on reserve, there are folks who still have on boil water advisory.
Yeah.
And to me, that is the biggest apartheid experience that I think Canadians should all be familiar with and outraged about. And so how do we help people have opportunity, get equal access to education? And make sure that people have the tools they need to succeed. And then people get to make choices about what they do with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
All people, not just these people or those people, but all people.
Yeah, well, there's lots of opportunities still, which is good for us. That lots of opportunities to help prepare the world and make it a better place. And so, yeah, I
That's
really
what I'm trying to do.
appreciated the book, how you interspersed it with a bit of your Jewish faith, and I did get to see what it was. I did get to meet a Jewish person, and even just the idea that all Jewish people have this idea of who will hide you. And that's part of your, like, I didn't grow up with this idea of, talking to all of my friends, like, who's going to hide you if, and you being shocked by the idea that the people you thought would hide you didn't even have your back when you needed it. And yeah, you can
Exactly.
just see, I just want to be respectful of your time here, though. You can start wrapping up here, but is there anywhere people can still hear your thoughts publicly, Selina, or anywhere else you want to
Yeah.
point people to?
Well, they can check me out at selinarobinson.ca. That's selinarobinson.ca. They can order my book from my website. I am available to give talks. I now have a Substack.
Oh,
You can
awesome.
find me on Substack. So I write about retirement, politics, and on being a Jew. Those are sort of
Ah,
the three areas of interest. I'm learning how to be retired. And everyone keeps laughing. I said, listen, it's harder than you think. Someone who used to work 18 hours a day
yeah.
to not doing any of that, it's a long day. So I want to
Yeah.
fill it with meaningful things.
Yeah.
So I'm available to give talks, and I'm doing some more writing. Yeah, and I became a new grandmother. So that's
Ah,
the next generation. So that's been really exciting for me.
oh, congratulations. That'll keep you
Thanks.
busy. Yeah, that's something to
Yeah.
do. Okay, well, we really appreciate all the work you've done for everybody in the public
Hey,
and in your career, and we appreciate the work you're still doing today, and then for coming on to the Canadians. Thank you very much, Selina.
thanks for having me, Jerry.
Okay, yeah. Well, goodbye, everybody. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to support the show, please visit our donations page or subscribe and share with friends. The Canadians, working class roots, a free speech lens, Canadian contrarians.